Good morning, everyone. In the back, could you settle down, please? I'm Terry Stockwell, the chair of the American Eel Board, and I call this meeting to order. We've got a long and likely contentious agenda today, so we're going to want to be expeditious and succinct in our comments. To begin, we're going to approve the agenda. I do have Russ who has something to add under other business, and I am going to, after consulting with staff, propose that we move the consideration of draft Amendment 4 up directly after the public comment period. It's the issue we're all here for, and I think we need to spend most of our time focusing on that. So without objection, we will make that change. Seeing none, approve the proceedings from the August 2013 board meeting. Are there any corrections? Seeing none, consider the proceedings approved. Public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Okay. For those folks that have traveled quite a distance to get here, there will be an opportunity to comment on Addendum 4 after the Kate's PowerPoint presentation and after the questions by the board on the presentation. And I request you to be succinct and to the point. We've got a full business. As in previous board meetings concerning Elvers, I've stepped down as chair because of the importance of this issue to the state of Maine, so I'm going to turn this meeting over to Bob Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Stockwell. I'm going to ask Kate to go through her presentation in a minute, but I think it's important to note at the outset here that this is the third meeting on this issue. I think the last two meetings have been at least 5 hours and felt like much longer than 5 hours. So I with that, I just ask of the board to remember that a lot of these issues have been talked about. I don't know if there's a whole lot of new information that's going to be introduced. I think I don't think it's productive to rehash all the things that have been said the last two meetings. I think we can move through this efficiently. We do have a fair amount of time, but that time can go pretty quickly. So with that request, I guess you'd call it. Yeah, Mitch.
I just want to state for the record that I do have a financial interest in the eel fishery, and although I'm looking forward to participating in today's discussions, I will not be making any motions, and I will be recusing myself from all votes or participation in my state's caucuses.
Thank you for those comments, Mitch. Appreciate that. Kate, you ready to go?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Background on the addendum for new board members. The American Eel FMP was approved in 1999. The board initiated Addendum 2 in 2006 to propose measures to facilitate escapement of silver eels on their spawning migration with the intent of halting any further declines in juvenile recruitment and eel abundance. In 2008, the board delayed management action on Addendum 2 in order to incorporate the results of the benchmark stock assessment in the management measures. The stock assessment subcommittee worked for over 4 years on the assessments, which was completed and accepted for management use in 2012. The stock assessment found that the American eel population in U.S. waters is depleted. In response to this, the board initiated the development of draft Addendum 3 to respond to this status. Draft Addendum 3 for public comment included a range of options for the commercial glass, yellow, and silver eel fisheries, as well as the recreational fishery. In August, the board approved Addendum 3. Specific measures included the 9-inch minimum size limit for commercial and recreational fishery, a 1/2 by 1/2 inch mesh requirement for the commercial fishery, a reduction in the bag limit from 50 fish per day per angler to 25 fish per day per angler, with an exemption for the party and charter boat industry, pigmented eel restrictions, and also restrictions on the silver eel fishery. At that same time, the board initiated the development of this addendum to include, but not limited to, addressing a coastwide glass eel quota, adequate monitoring requirements, adequate enforcement measures and penalties, transferability, and timely reporting, and also to address the New York silver eel weir fishery, which was granted an exemption from the requirements as specified under Addendum 3. So this addendum contains those measures covering the glass, yellow, and silver eel fisheries, and includes comments from the Law Enforcement Committee as well. So for the glass eel fishery, option 1 is the status quo. As we know, glass eel fisheries currently operate in Maine and South Carolina. Under the FMP, states are required to maintain existing or more conservative measures at the time of the implementation of the FMP, and it's these measures that prohibit the development of glass eel fisheries in the remaining states and jurisdictions. Option 2 in the addendum for public comment includes a closure of the fishery, and this would either be an immediate or delayed closure as a time frame as specified by the board. Option 3 that was developed is a quota for the glass eel fishery based on the more recent landings. The time period recommended by the plan development team is from 1998 to 2010. The plan development team does not recommend using landings data from 2011 and 2012, as these years were not representative of the historic operation of the fishery, given the recent spike in demand for glass eels and illegal harvest of glass eels. So under this option, Maine would be allocated 5,233 pounds, and South Carolina would be allocated 70 pounds. The allocation for each state was based off of their landings from this time period, and they were calculated independently from one another. Option 4 is a quota based on the ORCS methodology. This is a report that's calculating the acceptable biological catch for stocks that have reliable catch-only data, ORCS. The board has previously seen this method used for menhaden under Amendment 2. It specifies that the board will set the TAC based on the best available science, but if the projections are not recommended for use by the TC, then the board will set a TAC based on the ORCS approach, which has been used by the councils. I'm going to explain a little bit about this for those that might not be familiar with it. The ORCS methodology was derived to set an overfishing limit and an allowable biological catch and an annual catch limit for stocks that have only landings and discards data. And this is the most reliable source of data that we have for American eel. And so the buffer between the overfishing limit and the ABC accounts for the scientific uncertainty, while the buffer between the ABC and the ACL accounts for the management uncertainty. So the plan development team used this method based on the time period from 1998 to 2010. And so under the first step, to account for scientific uncertainty, the PDT recommended starting with a multiplier of 0.5. So this is the multiplier that's applied to the landings from this base period. And this multiplier was selected by the PDT given the depleted status of the eel population. However, the PDT recommended increasing it from 0.5 to 0.7 due to the high productivity, the high natural mortality, and the limited exploitation coastwide of glass eels. So this results in the multiplier of 0.75 to account for scientific uncertainty. From here, to account for management uncertainty, the PDT recommends a multiplier of 0.9 to account for the uncertainty associated with the landings and any illegal or unregulated landings that occur in the fishery. What this results in is an allocation to Maine of 3,501 pounds and an allocation to South Carolina of 71 pounds. If a quota system is implemented by the management board, there can be options to address quota overages and quota underages, as well as allowances for research and aquaculture. So that's if the board chooses to go forward with the quota based on the landings or the ORC method. Under quota overages, there is an option for an equal payback, which would be pound for pound the following year. There is also an option for a quota overage tolerance. And this would be a tolerance of up to 5% would be allowed without payback. And this is just given the environmental conditions that can cause the landings to spike overnight and so it's hard to sometimes account and plan for those. But if a state exceeded its quota above the 5%, then the entire amount must be paid back. Option 6 deals with quota underages. And under this option, up to 25% of the unused quota may be added to the state's quota in the following year. Any quota that is rolled over can only be used in the year following the underage and could not be carried over for additional years. Option 7 deals with research and aquaculture allowances. The first option is the Research Set-Aside Program. This RSA program, as included in the addendum, will establish a procedure through which up to 5% of a state's glass eel quota may be set aside to fund research. The quota could be allocated either through a bidding process where the fishermen bid on the quota with the funds raised distributed to approved research projects, or through an application process where the quota is allocated to researchers with harvest sold to fund approved research projects. And it would be the option of the state to participate in the RSA program. And any research projects would be subject to review and approved by the participating state in consultation with the technical committee. The other option is for a aquaculture allowance, and under the aquaculture program, this would allow for a small portion, recommended up to 5%, of a state or jurisdiction's quota of glass eels to be harvested and used for aquaculture purposes. The request for aquaculture would be subject to TC review and board approval. Option 8, under the glass eel fishery, proposed measures deals with the reporting requirements. This option would require daily electronic accounting to the state for harvesters and dealers in order to ensure accurate reporting of the harvest. Option 9 is a monitoring requirement. This states that any state or jurisdiction with a commercial glass eel fishery must implement a fisheries independent life cycle survey covering glass, yellow, and silver eels within at least one river system. And the survey proposals would be subject to TC review. Moving on to the yellow eel fisheries. Currently, there are commercial yellow eel fisheries operating in all states with the exception of Pennsylvania and the District of Columbia. The management measures selected by the board in Addendum 3 that I described earlier will go into effect January 1, 2014. And this includes the 9-inch minimum size and the half-by-half minimum mesh requirements. Option 1 would be the status quo to maintain these measures. Option 2 would be a quota based on the landings. The PDT used 3 time periods to develop the landings, the quota allocation options, 1998 to 2010, 2000 to 2010, and 2005 to 2010. And I'd like to note that the minimum allocated quota was fixed at 2,000 pounds. So if a state's proposed quota under any of these different landing scenarios was less than this amount, it was automatically set to 2,000 pounds. And this provides all states a quota level sufficient to cover any directed or bycatch landings without creating an administrative burden. And this 2,000 pound quota is not expected to promote a notable increase in effort in the fisheries. Page 12, Table 5 on page 12 shows the different quota allocations by state and the difference from the current 2012 harvest. Option 3 is the quota based on the ORC's methodology. Again, the minimum quota would be fixed at 2,000 pounds for states that fell below this, and the same 3 time periods were used as the previous option. Similar to the glass eel, setting the glass eel quota, the PDT started with a multiplier of 0.5 to account for scientific uncertainty, given that the American eel stock is at low levels. However, unlike glass eels, yellow eels face an increasing number of threats and for longer periods of time across their entire range. Additionally, natural mortality at this life phase is more similar to fishing mortality, and overall productivity at this stage is less than it is for glass eels. So therefore, the PDT recommends maintaining the 0.5 multiplier to account for scientific uncertainty. To account for management uncertainty, a multiplier of 0.9 is recommended to account for any illegal, unregulated, and unreported landings. And so using the scientific uncertainty and the management uncertainty, the quota allocation coast-wide is specified under the medium acceptable risk option. And this translates to the quota allocations as seen on Table 8 on page 15. If a quota system is implemented by the board can choose to address quota overages and transfers. So these options are only applicable if the quota management is chosen. Option 4 deals with the quota overages, and this would be a pound-for-pound payback the following year. Option 5 would be a quota transfer, and this would be a state-to-state quota transfer, so states could petition other states to provide them quota if needed, and this quota transfers would be approved by the board, and they would have to be submitted by December 31st of that fishing year, similar to what we have for bluefish. And under this option, the 2,000-pound automatic quota is not eligible for transfer. Option 6 deals with yellow to glass eel transfers. And this option is only applicable if the board approves quota management for both the yellow eel fishery as well as the glass eel fishery. So under this option, states or jurisdictions could petition the board to transfer all or a portion of their yellow eel quota to a glass eel fishery within their states. This would apply to any states with the exception of states that receive that 2,000-pound quota. They would not be eligible to transfer that quota amount into a glass eel fishery. And the petitioning state must develop a transfer plan that details the scientific analysis the transfer is based on and clearly shows that the transfer will not increase overall eel fishing mortality in the state. The board should task the technical committee to develop a template of minimum standards for the transfer plans. These transfer plans would be subject to TC review and board approval with a recommended submission date by July 1st of the preceding fishing year. For those states that are interested in the development of glass eel fishery but have minimal yellow eel landings to transfer or would like to increase the transfer amounts, they would be allowed to petition based on a combination of the historic landings in their fishery, any habitat improvements that the state or jurisdiction has undertaken, the enforcement capability of the state or jurisdiction, what monitoring requirements they have in place, and also any other conservation measures that are applicable to American eel. If approved, the state or jurisdiction would be locked into that transfer and would not be able to transfer the quota back to the fishery that it came from. And this would be to promote stability in both the fisheries and to decrease the uncertainty that participants might have if either fishery was eligible for a transfer at any time. Moving on to the silver eel fishery, under Addendum 3, the states and jurisdictions are required to implement no take of eels from September 1st through December 31st for any gear type other than baited pots and traps or spears. These gears may still be fished, but retention of eels is prohibited. New York was granted a 1-year exemption from the requirements under Addendum 3. Option 1, the current regulations is the status quo. The current regulations would remain, and the 1-year exemption would expire for the Delaware eel weir fishery on December 31st, 2014. Option 2 would be an extension of the sunset provision at a time frame specified by the board. Option 3 for the New York weir fishery would be effort reductions or like a time closure. And this would limit the Delaware River weir fishery from August 15th to September 30th. And the table provided shows landings. So this would essentially cut out the October portion of the fishery and mostly half of the August fishery. The majority of landings are occurring really in September and October. Option 4 would be a license cap, and under this option, the Delaware River weir fishery would be limited to those permitted New York participants that fished and reported landings anytime during the period 2010 to 2013. Once issued, the license are not eligible for transferability, and only one license could be issued per participant. The Law Enforcement Committee has weighed in on the ability to enforce management measures that were included in Addendum 3, which are similar to the measures contained here in this addendum. And this has included analysis of the glass eel fishery, quota management options, and the time closures. The LEC has weighed in that they are unlikely to obtain the resources necessary to effectively monitor and control a limited glass eel harvest. The LEC has also weighed in that a quota system would be difficult to enforce depending on the strategy that is associated with the quota implementation. And as the complexity of the quota system increases, that will generally reduce the enforceability of that system. The LEC has also weighed in that enforcement of the time area closures for the silver eel fishery are reasonable. If approved for public comment today, public hearings would be held from November to January, and the board would consider approval at the February meeting. And that concludes my report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Kate, and you and the plan development team have done a lot of work since the August meeting, and hopefully it'll help things along today. What I'd like to do is have specific questions from the board to Kate on the draft addendum, and let's try not to get into the next step of talking about whether including options, taking options out, just questions at this point. And then, as Mr. Stockwell mentioned, there are a number of folks in the back of the room that travel a great distance. I think after we have board questions, we'll take public comment from those folks, and then we'll get into the board decisions. I'm not sure if Mr. Stockwell mentioned this at the beginning, but regardless of where we are at noon, we're going to break for a previously scheduled lunch event, and then we'll reconvene this board at 1:30 if necessary. I assume it will be necessary. Reconvene at 1:30 and then finish up the agenda. So with that, questions for Kate and the plan development team. Terry, then Doug.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got one question for you, Kate. Why, and Brad, probably both of you, why, when you were drafting this document, is there only one quota based on landings for the Elver fishery and 3 for yellow eel?
The PDT did look at a range of options, but was most comfortable with using the 1998 to 2010 for the glass eel fishery, and for the yellow eel fishery just did include that range of options given their confidence in increased confidence in the landings data.
So there was no PDT confidence in the Elver landings back to the same time periods?
The PDT just chose to use 1998 to 2010 to encompass the kind of range in the fishery. We didn't look at other timeframes, but that can certainly be something that we could be tasked to do.
Doug Grout.
Thank you, Bob. I have 3 clarification questions about different sections. On page 10, under sub-option 7B, glass eel harvest for aquaculture, there is a sentence here that says, excuse me, I just have to move this. Eels sold for aquaculture may not be sold until they reach legal size in the jurisdiction of operations unless otherwise specified, and I'd like some clarification as who's doing the specification, what's the intent here, who's going to be specifying things.
So under this option, the requests from the state would have to be submitted to the technical committee for their review and board approval. So the petitioning state could request for allowances to sell the eels at a lower minimum size, but that would be subject to TC review and board approval.
So that's the intent behind this. Okay. It might be good to clarify that it needs to be approved by TC. Then if we go to page 16 of the document, under option 6, yellow eel to glass eel transfers, where there's a sentence in the middle that says, for states or jurisdictions that are interested in development of a glass eel fishery but have minimal yellow eel landings. I'm trying to get a feel for what minimal yellow eel landings are, given that there's going to be a 2,000 pound quota here that will be given as a minimum. Is the 2,000 pound considered minimum? But I didn't think so, because I think you're not allowing to transfer that.
So the 2,000 pound quota allocation is just given to those states that have, I think New Hampshire has 300 pounds. Yeah, it's very low, just to reduce that administrative burden. If New Hampshire would be interested in petitioning to participate in this transfer request, then New Hampshire could use its 300-pound landing and then take into account other actions that the state has done to improve passage or habitat conservations to increase the transfer amounts. So the minimal amount is really just to kind of say for those states that are given this 2,000 pound quota or, don't necessarily have enough yellow eel landings that when they apply the scientific method to transfer to their glass eel fishery, they don't end up with 1 pound of glass eels.
Okay, and one more clarification question. We're going to the next page, which is under the Delaware River, is page 17, option 3, effort reduction time closure. Just so I'm clear on this, the sentence says, under this option, the state of New York would require to implement no take of eels in the Delaware River and tributaries with New York from October 15th through September 30th from any gear type other than baited traps, pots or spears and weirs. So those would be one or the other, right?
That is a typographical error. Is a very good catch. It should be baited pots, traps, spears, and weirs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Kate. It was information flowing pretty quickly, so I guess my questions relate to management uncertainty. What exactly was the basis for management uncertainty, and did you cover scientific uncertainty?
The recommendations for the multipliers for management uncertainty are just those recommendations from the PDT. The board, should discuss and develop what their comfort level is in setting the multiplier for the management uncertainty. For the scientific uncertainty, this multiplier was chosen just given the life history of American eel, confidence in landings data, the life history, the information we have on the stock status, and the vulnerability of the species at that life stage, how long they live. So it takes into account a lot of different factors.
All set, Rob? Other questions kind of moving around. Dr. Daniel.
Yeah, and I've been in and out, so if this has been asked, I apologize. I'm trying to figure out why there's an allowance to rollover quota. That seems to be inconsistent with every plan and every argument we've ever had around this table, especially on a depleted stock. So why would there even be a consideration for quota rollovers, even for 1 year?
The quota rollover for the glass eel fishery was just in recognition of the fact that there's a lot of environmental conditions that influence the amount of elvers that will be entering the rivers, and so some years there just will not be an availability of glass eels that are coming up those streams and rivers. And given the PDT was comfortable with a 25% rollover of the quota and taking into account the reductions that the quota options are allocating, they were comfortable with doing that. And then also a small, just considering a quota rollover for the yellow eel fishery as well.
Just as a follow-up, that's not a very satisfactory reason from my perspective. So I'm assuming we're going to have an opportunity to take some of this stuff out of the document later after we hear public comment?
Yes, we will, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Moving around, I know I saw Jim Gilmore's hand, then I'll get Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I got questions on two areas, Kate. Let me go to the silver eel one first, because I think that's a little more straightforward. And if you remember at the last meeting, we kind of got a little bit bollocksed up because of, we go back to the May meeting. I think the AP recommendation was that there would be, that they thought that the 6 weirs that were going to exist were not a problem. And in fact, they quite frankly stated that, so that there would be an exemption for the current, situation. But after we got to the August meeting, we looked at, well, we had to do some kind of a significant reduction. So, and that's understandable. And I think the options that we have in there give us some latitude on that, with the exception of the option 4, I believe it is. That would completely eliminate the fishery eventually. And that's, I think, going well beyond what the reduction was. That's not a significant reduction. That's an eventual elimination of the fishery. Because of that provision that says that the licenses are not transferable. So, as Lewis had said, I think one of the changes we need to be making that is that maybe take that transferability provision out. I think we would like to reduce it by as much as 50% of the licenses, but again, it was not to completely eliminate that fishery over time. So that's point number 1. Number 2 gets on the yellow eel fishery with the quota options. And we talked about Menhaden a couple of days ago, and we're setting up the stage for the same thing again. We have very poor landings for the time periods that we're talking about, and based upon those numbers, we're looking at, I think New York will be getting a 2,000 eel quota, whatever, which is, we know is low. And we're going to go right back into what we did with Menhaden, set up a quota that we're suddenly not going to be able to live by. So we're going to have big problems trying to support some quota. I have no problem with a quota if we're basing it on good data, but if we're basing it on poor data, we're going to go around and around on this, because I'm not getting back into Menhaden too. So we need to talk more on that. Thank you.
Kate, do you have a response?
The PDT did discuss option 4 into the silver eel fishery and did recognize that over time the fishery would be phased out, but the PDT was supportive of including that option in the document, just given that all other states had to eliminate their silver eel fisheries.
Adam.
Thank you. On page 16, under option 6 for the yellow to glass eel transfers, with the sentence that ends, clearly show the transfer will not increase overall eel fishing mortality in the state. Do you have any examples you could provide at this point of how we would do that? New Jersey without a glass eel fishery right now, it would be something that we could potentially use this option in the future, but some examples of what that would mean would be helpful at this juncture.
And the next sentence states that the board and the TC will develop a template of the minimum standards for these transfer plans, but it would be subject to the state to use the data that they have and develop the plan, and a plan that would be pass approval by the technical committee and the board.
Work in progress. Adam, you have a follow-up?
Well, I think your last statement, work in progress. So again, I was looking for an example now, and I guess the answer is we don't have one to show you what it might look like right now.
Kate, do you have a response?
And really the basis for this is coming from the development of the sustainability plans under shad and river herring. I think many of the technical committee members on shad and river herring are also on eel, and many of the PDT members are also the same. And I think just given kind of the successes that we've had with that, and also the areas for improvement of those plans, we would be able to move forward with the development of plans and build on kind of existing knowledge.
Mitch, did you have your hand up at the beginning of this? Nope. Russ.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think the difference that I see in shad and river herring versus eels, it's glass eels, the mortality, natural mortality in glass eels is much higher, and that it's very hard to take what you would catch as a glass eel and relate it to yellow eels. And I mean, that's our problem when we start all this. Whereas for shad and river herring, we had young a year into season, things of that nature that you can actually use to project to adults. So I don't see how, and maybe you guys will come up with a template for this, but I know you've struggled with this for years, on how you're going to have a connection between any glass eels to yellow eels. And for a state to be able to show that when you know there's not data coast-wide, it'd be very tough for a state to do that. Thank you.
And that was one kind of one of the reasons why the PDT was supportive of the state plan, was because there's so many variations regionally between the states, between river systems, and so there is different data that's available.
Other questions of clarification from Kate or the PDT? Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just let me follow up on this yellow to glass eel transfer thing to be sure I understand. Essentially, the PDT is not proposing some multiplier. They're going to have the states pitch or try to sell their individual multipliers to get their plans approved. Is that correct?
That is correct. The states would be able to, and the multiplier kind of refers to the ORC methodology, but the states could, using the data that they have, develop a plan to say they would like to, transfer their yellow eel fishery to a glass eel fishery, and if the board does task the technical committee with the development of minimum standards, the technical committee could look at, habitat improvements, law enforcement measures, monitoring measures, and develop maybe some standards there to assist the states and say, given your efforts here in these other areas, this would equate to an allowance for a quota of this amount, possibly.
Okay. And if I can, I'll jump back with you to option 3. I know you and I had some communication about that this morning. The way you explained it to me is those quotas for Maine and South Carolina for glass eels were established on historic landings within each of those states independently. Now, the way I read the language in option 3, I infer from that a coast-wide quota was established and that was allocated back to the states. Can the PDT try to clarify that language before this goes out for public comment?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. Great, thank you. All set, Ross?
Yep, thank you.
Mitch.
Kate, I sat in on most of the PDT calls, but I think I missed 1.5. The concept, has the PDT considered any alternatives to setting a glass eel quota for a state that wants to enter the fishery other than a transfer of a yellow eel quota? And I specifically refer to using some sort of watershed discharge basis, meaning the glass eel quota did we talk about watershed discharge? Because it seems that the glass eel, the states that by using a yellow eel quota, we're really just rewarding states that have had a historical yellow eel fishery by letting them get a biggest share of the glass eels. But environmentally speaking, it might be that the glass eels are really recruiting in much greater numbers to states like Massachusetts and New Hampshire that have very small yellow eel quotas, but they might be the states most amenable to a glass eel fishery because they have geographies very similar to Maine. Was this, I know that it was identified as one management approach, but I'm just curious, was it discussed at all?
Well, I think kind of what you're discussing is really encompassed in the transfer plans from the yellow to the glass eel fishery, so that if the states were opening up habitats, drainage areas, then they could use that to petition for more quota.
I don't see any other questions around the table. Oh, Tom, and then Rob.
Yeah, thank you. It was helpful to me to see the economic value that was added to the glass eel fishery section to understand the magnitude of that fishery, and I was wondering if it would also be possible to include some economic information as it relates to the yellow eel management options. Speaking for Maryland, for example, those reference periods are going to result in a very significant reduction, disproportionate to other states, up to 50%. I think it would be important for the public and the board to understand under the current options what kind of economic impact that will have to fishermen. So if that information is available, and we'd be happy to share with you the information we have on the value for Maryland to see if we could get some economic information for the yellow eel quota options. Thanks.
Yes, if we have that information available, we'll certainly can include it in the public comment document.
Rob O'Reilly, do you have your hand up again?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question just relates to the data. And if I remember correctly, and I think it was a couple of meetings ago, given the completion of the stock assessment, the recommendation was not to include data beyond 2010 as a risk-averse approach. But I'm wondering, with the ORC process, has that viewpoint changed? And the reason I am asking this, if we're already having indications that data quality might be more suspect as you go back in time, and with some of these time period, couple of these time periods starting in 1998, is there a good trade-off to maybe consider later data? And I don't know whether that's been talked about.
That's something that the board could consider, additions of years to the allocation methods, and also taking into account the board's comfort level in assigning a multiplier for the management uncertainty.
Dr. Daniel. Every pause that I give, somebody puts their hand up, so I got to move quicker. Go ahead, Louis.
Well, yeah, you do. Looking over sub-option 7B on the glass eel harvest for aquaculture, at some point, I mean, there needs to be another option there, because basically what that does is that limits all aquaculture activities to Maine and South Carolina. So there would be no, if this addendum were to pass, and if we're looking at trying to develop an aquaculture situation in North Carolina, which we're all aware of, then we wouldn't have an option with addendum 4. Once it passed, we'd no longer be able to participate. So there needs to be something, sort of like what Mitch was saying about the glass. You're going to have a hard time transferring yellow eels to glass eels and disadvantaging your yellow eel fishermen. I mean, that's going to be a storm that I don't think any of us want to go to. But there needs to be some option for how to provide aquaculture fish to various states that have an interest in the aquaculture facility. Otherwise, we're all out of the game after this is done, whether we get our permit request approved or not. So that's a concern that at some point before we go to, I mean, if everybody agrees, I think there needs to be some way to allocate for bona fide brick and mortar, TC and board approved aquaculture operations, some allowable harvest of glass eels anywhere.
Thank you, Louis. Keep that in mind. We're going to get to motions on things to add or delete from the document, so keep that in mind, kind of the next step. I had Representative Kamiga, then I had, you're all set, and then I had Lauren after that. So, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question about, is there a way to, if we had accurate censuses of silver eel escapement, to transfer that to either glass silver eel or yellow eel quota? Do we have the technical ability to instead of basing it on historical catch, but basing it on the state's production of, I mean, because silver eels are really the thing that we need to produce in order to maintain the stock quality.
The PDT did look at that, since we started with the ORC's method, with the glass eels, and then we moved it to the yellow eel fishery, and we discussed this transferability from the yellow to the glass eel fishery. The PDT believed that the high productivity of the silver eels and how important they are, and given how long that they have already survived and how close they are to spawning in the Sargasso Sea, they were not comfortable with including that option.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I wasn't referring to transferring quota, but to somehow using a census of a state's silver eel production to transfer back to how many, if they're producing X number of silver eels, they can harvest X number of glass eels or X number of pounds of yellow eel? Is there a way to say, okay, your production is X, so your harvest can be Y?
And this could be something that could be petitioned in the transferability plan if a state wanted to go that route. I think the TC could consider that.
I had Mr. Lustig, and then I think I'm going to go to the audience after that. It seems to be dying down here at the board. Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kate, right at the end of your presentation, you gave us a brief summary of input from the Law Enforcement Committee. I was taking notes, and I believe you said that the quota system was going to be difficult to enforce. Perhaps you told us, but I didn't catch it. What did they recommend in terms of enforceability?
The difficulty enforcement of the quota system was just in relation to, it depended on which management strategy was associated with how the states implemented it. And so it kind of just depends on that. And I don't know if Joe would like to comment any more on that. Just as the quota systems became increasingly complex, that would create problems for enforcement.
Joe, do you have any law enforcement perspective on it?
Well, we've been actually reviewing our data in Maine. We've hired an investigator to compare our harvest landings with our dealer landings reports, and it's a work in progress. It's been an eye-opening thing for me. This year we're going to a scanning system, I hope, for harvesters, and I'm really optimistic that's going to be successful. So maybe talking about scanning, requiring a scan card to sell offers glass eels would be an important thing to use. It would certainly help law enforcement and identify who's selling the eels. But it's a tough thing for law enforcement to monitor. We're doing it in the shrimp fishery successfully in Maine. Last couple of years we got into kind of quota management for shrimp. And I see down the road it's kind of the way of the future for law enforcement to get more involved with landing data and place a lot more importance on landings and that information.
Thank you, Joe. Lauren, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just wanted to say that certainly the recommendations of law enforcement are absolutely critical because if we cannot be absolutely confident in their ability to provide us with a system that ensures that poaching and cheating of all types is occurring, then we are left without confidence in our overall decisions.
Thank you, Lauren. I think the law enforcement folks, not to speak for Joe, but they'll probably say that simple is better. The more complicated the system gets, the harder it is to enforce. So we can keep that in mind moving forward. From the audience, can I have a show of hands of folks that would like to comment to the board? I only see 3, which is good. The public microphone is right next to Mr. Lustig. I'll ask you, please keep your comments brief. There's only 3 of you, but I think that the board is very aware of the importance of this fishery and the economic importance of this fishery to a lot of states and a lot of fishermen. So with that, sir, if you don't mind coming forward, state your name.
Good morning. My name is Rick Allen from American Eel Forum. I just want to support Lewis's comments pertaining to the aquaculture, and I'd like to just share with you a quote from NOAA's website. Estimates suggest that seafood production from wild fish stocks will be insufficient to meet growing U.S. and global demand for seafood products in the next century. While maintaining and rebuilding wild stocks remains the heart of our mission, stewardship also demands that we encourage the production of seafood products through environmentally sound aquaculture to help meet this increasing demand. Today, the United States produces 0.8% of all aquaculture. Asia produces 88%. Aquaculture is important to any fishery, and for the eel fishery, I believe that it should be removed from any quota system and it should stand on its own. If there is a brick and mortar facility that is licensed and prepared to do business and investment has been made in aquaculture, that facility should have the ability to go before the board in the state, before the commission in the state, and stand alone as far as a quota to get to have the ability to harvest its eels, to get the aquaculture industry off the ground here for the eels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I had 2 hands over on this side. If you just come forward to the mic and then state your name before your comments, please.
Good morning. My name's Gregory Blackler. I wrote a couple of letters, so I'm just going to kind of highlight one and address the one that Kate just presented to. Anyways, all right, so here we go. The goal of an elver is to make it to fresh water, where it starts to feed and grow. Maine is a perfect habitat as it has 3,500 miles of tidal coastline, 33,000 square miles of total acreage, and 13.5% of it is water. Maine also has 3,900 miles of streams and 24,000 miles of brooks. Maine has the most extensive system of undeveloped, free-flowing rivers in any state in the northern United States. Because of this, Maine is unique, accompanied with several dam removals in a year and a strong co-management approach to a sustainable fishery. Maine and its alvermen has and will continue to take an active approach to ensure our fishery survives. So, committee members, be cautious as you consider making important decisions on clearly a fishery that needs a lot more understanding. We understand how it works all the way up in Maine. Ask for our help. We will be glad to assist and show whoever. Use us as a model of how to set up a fishery. But whatever you do, don't change what we have worked so hard on. Our methods are obviously working. And my other letter, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we've given up over the last 15 to 20 years. In 1996, Maine had 2,207 licensed elver fishermen. By 2012, there was 557. Over 2,600 fyke nets were being used in 1996. By 2012, there was 347. The amount of dip nets was over 2,000 in 1996, and by 2012, only 172. Jumping around, the most important and successful law adopted, I feel, was the non-fishing of the middle third of the river in 1996. This has allowed the strongest elvers a safe and unimpeded passage upstream. I'm going to jump around a little bit more. I know you guys are rushed for time. Let's see. Gear reductions played a major role in sustaining our fishery, but equally important are dam removals. I've talked about that. There have been 17 dam removals to aid in the unimpeded passage of elvers over the last 20 years. The VZ Dam on the Penobscot River was the most recently removed. And when you add that one and the Great Works Dam also on the Penobscot River, it opens up over 15,000 acres for the American eel. And I guess I'll just skip to the end what I have to say here. The state of Maine and its alvermen have been very active and compliant in terms of keeping our fishery sustainable. We have given up a lot over the last 20 years, and we feel enough has been done to ensure it stays this way. Again, if other states want to experiment with catching elvers, we strongly encourage adopting Maine's laws as a starting point. If any research is to be conducted, we are friendly people, and will offer our help, our nets, and our time to ensure a proper and accurate study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackler. Richie White, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions for Kate. If I'm reading this correctly, and it's possible I'm not, why did the PDT not consider having quotas available to all states outside of the yellow eel transfer?
The PDT did not have the information sufficient to set those quota levels, and so they felt the most appropriate way to meet the goal of the addendum was for states to allow states to petition for this transfer as opposed to setting a coastwide glass eel quota.
And second part of the question is,
if we selected option 3, that would mean that 5,293 pounds of elvers could be harvested by Maine and South Carolina. If a state did a transfer and was successful and got a certain amount of pounds of elvers for their yellow, would that come out of that number, or would that be a harvest in addition to that number?
That would be a harvest in addition to that number.
So did the PDT do any off the back of the hand calculations in how much that could be? In other words, are we, if we're saying that they think that the 5,293 pounds is our goal, then what if we double that with the transfer, and wouldn't that be too large a harvest?
The transfer request, though, would come with a corresponding reduction in the yellow eel fishery, and it could also be corresponding to improvements in habitat enhancements, law enforcement measures to reduce illegal harvest, monitoring to help understand the life history of American eel. So overall, it should lead to a reduction in mortality.
I think I had Jim Gilmore's hand, and I know I have one more hand in the audience, and Pat Kelleher. So I'll go Jim, then Pat Kelleher, then the audience comment, if that's okay. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kate, Table 5, if you could help me out a little bit with it, because I'm not sure I understand it, and maybe it's just I'm a little slow today, but there's some amazing percentages on that, and I'm looking at Massachusetts in particular. So could you explain that a little bit better? It says essentially those historic landings based upon current landings, and 699% really just jumps off the page. So.
And for Massachusetts, it's because the Massachusetts landings has been about 300 pounds, I believe, roughly. You'd probably see corresponding for New Hampshire and those other states that have those 2,000 pound amounts, because they have, double digit, maybe triple digit landings in 2012.
Jim, follow up?
And then, so the negatives indicate those. So they would have that would be an increase for them of 700%. It would be, and then the other ones in the negatives would be a decrease in percentage. But that's all based upon 2012 landings that were showing significant differences than the historic landings.
Yes, then the negative ones there would be decreases in landings, and it is from the 2012.
Pat Kelleher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have many different comments here, but they would evolve into a motion, but I do not want to move forward with the motion until you've completed the public. So I'm just checking in where we are.
Yeah, let me get their last public comment, then we'll come back to you if you have a motion ready, because I think that's the next portion of this is decide what to do with Amendment 4, either doctor it up or set a course of action. The final hand in the audience. Yes, sir. Please come forward.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Jeffrey Pierce. I'm the executive director of the Maine Alva Fishermen's Association, and I'm not going to read this. Before you have a letter on comments for draft addendum 4 from the Maine Alva Fishermen's Association. We spent all weekend gathering 197 signatures in response from this. There's a lot of scared people in Washington County, the poorest county on the eastern seaboard. Though remanding this back to the TC and the plan development team might not be an option, we certainly would like to see an impact study on your regulatory and your management. Greg Blackler brought up a lot of good points, so I won't have to reiterate them. But we really just ask for a fair and balanced approach to this fishery, and status quo in the glass eel fishery, with each state coming up with modifiers if they want to enter into the glass eel fishery, coming up with their own conservation equivalencies, as we all have different habitat. Maine has a tremendous amount of river heron habitat that we've opened up. River heron and elvers share the same habitat. They're in the water at the same time. They claim the same impediments, and they have the same outward migration problems. The glass eel fishermen in Maine are being challenged by these regulations. Outward migration is the challenge in the for the silver eels. They grind up 20,000, 30,000 pounds of silver eels pretty easily in the state of Maine alone. Each silver eel is able of spawning 1 million plus larvae. That's more than we could even imagine taking. Considering 20 silver eels, if all their larvae lived, would be the total catch for Maine. We're talking a fishery that had 19,000 plus pounds last year. That's not a lot of poundage when you think about what's being ground up by the turbines. We just ask for a fair and equitable solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Dr. Daniel.
Yeah, to that point that the speaker just made, I'm kind of fading in and out of the twilight zone here with this plan, and I think we're going to have a real problem if we don't answer some of the questions that are arising from a technical perspective on the number of silver eels and the resulting number of elvers and that type of information. There's no way we can't have at least some estimate of how many of 2,500 elvers to the pound, how many make it to the silver eel stage. There's got to be a way to figure that out, even if it's subjective. There's got to be a way. Is it a pound for pound? I would say probably pretty close. Or but are there some folks that think it's 100,000 pounds of eels for a pound of elvers? No. So but we keep getting here comments that 9 eels make more elvers than are caught. Well, we got to remember that every day that egg is in the Sargasso Sea, and then that leptocephalus forms, and it's floating around out there in the middle of the ocean, you're losing. That 9 million eggs is dropping every hour by huge percentages. All right, so trying to forecast year class strength is something we always wanted to be able to do, but it's nothing we've ever been able to do. But if we're going to just say 2,000 pounds per state that doesn't have a glass eel fish, that doesn't have a yellow eel fishery, well, how about 2,000 pounds for each state that wants a glass eel fishery? Is it going to have any impact on the stock? No. But so we're going to have a real hard time with this plan when we go out to the public if we don't address some of those technical questions and technical concerns, and at least provide some information to the public, as to what this conversion is going to look like if we move forward with it. And then why not just, make it easy on ourselves and either have a fishery or not, and authorize some allowable level of elver harvest to see what kind of interest there is from the states. That's going to be tough.
Thanks, Lewis. I think. Brad, do you have a comment on the relationship between the life stages?
Yeah, quickly, the Stock Assessment Subcommittee did entertain this question in July, and we did produce a survival model that would allow you to consider options, but as we described in August, the assumptions are really outstanding. We just don't have information on mortality in marine waters on a watershed basis. It's just limited, but the board could task the TC and the Stock Assessment Subcommittee to revisit this, and we could try to produce something that had levels of assumptions that could be acceptable. It's worth trying. Another point to consider is the stock assessment was pretty clear. Opening new fisheries would not be compatible with the goals of reducing mortality. So we have to have checks and balances if we want to open new fisheries.
Thanks, Brad. I saw Tom Foti hasn't commented yet, then I saw Mitch's hand, then I'm going to go back to Pat, because I think he said he had a motion to maybe focus this discussion a bit. So Tom, with that, go ahead, please.
Yeah, we do a lot of plans where we can't basically actually say what would happen, how many striped bass produce that over how many survive. I don't want to do voodoo science. I mean, if we can't get something that's even close to being that we can back up in a reputable way, we can't go there. I'm not going to put something in a paper and prove something goes out in a plan to go out for discussion that we're just pulling out of the hat. I mean, we might as well just say that we're going to pull this out of the hat. So we got to really be confident that we're going to put something in a document. Again, as we're going through this process, remember this started as a process because we were concerned about the health of the stock of eels. I mean, that's the real concern up and down the coast and up in the Great Lakes. So when we start talking about how do we accommodate, remember the goal is to reduce the mortality on eels. And I also am upset with the guys, I agree with the guys in the overfishery. You know, and I said this on striped bass, I've said it on weak fish. We can regulate the fishermen, but we can never regulate the power plants. They get permits to kill as many as they want, as long as they have a permit to do it, as long as they have FERC. So I always wanted to put a plan in that they have to do a reduction if we have to do a reduction. And that's, you know, we talked about that in Habitat Committee when I started it 20 years ago at the commission level, and nothing's ever been accomplished. NIMS can't do it, Fish and Wildlife Service can't do it, and we don't seem to be able to do it.
Mitchell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kate, could you very quickly put up this slide? I think it was the monitoring requirements. It was either the one right after law enforcement, I believe, or right before. And
For the glacial fishery?
yes, and I think it was a general option. It was where the technical committee, the PDT has suggested in option number 9 that jurisdictions with the glass eel fishery must implement a fishery independent life cycle survey covering glass eels, yellow, and silver eels. Following up on your point, Lewis, this is the first step. This is the necessary foundation to beginning to do the analysis of what mortality rates are. The technical committee, the advisory panel, I believe the PDT as well, obviously the PDT as well, have all recommended this be done. And when we consider how can we make this process go forward more effectively, the point you make is really a critical one. We need to understand what is the mortality and the relationship between the life cycles. And as Brad has pointed out, and been pointed out several times, it's highly variable based on the nature of the watershed. Sometimes we've seen reports in some areas where the mortality is 99.9. We've seen reports that say mortality is as low as 96% and 96%. And the differences between those two numbers are huge because they're orders of magnitude. So I just would say to my fellow commissioners, please, no matter what we do today, let's try to get moving on this option 9. We need the information.
A couple other hands, but go Doug and then back to Pat, if that's okay, Pat.
I realize that Pat has a motion, but before we get into the bigger thing, there's been one concern that I've had with the way this document is that we have a large number of states that years and years ago put in minimum sizes as conservation measures that have essentially eliminated the elver fishery. Now, in our previous management, we allowed 2 states an exception. And one of the things that I've been wrestling with, because my state has virtually no yellow eel fishery, is what happens if we get a stock assessment in 2015 or 2016 that says conditions have improved. We no longer have a depleted resource. I really don't have a mechanism other than to transfer 100 pounds of recreationally caught yellow eels to get into an elver fishery where we could potentially have a sustainable fishery. So with your indulgence, I'd like to make a motion to add a sub-option that would provide the states that have put in the 6-inch minimum size limit so long ago as a conservation measure, the opportunity to open up, have an elver fishery, should we get a stock assessment in the future that would indicate that we no longer have a depleted resource. So with your indulgence, if I could make this one motion at this particular point in time before we get into...
Well, since I thought you were commenting on some of the previous comments, and I mentioned that I would go back to Pat because he said he had a motion earlier. So let's handle his motion, then we can come back to yours to change the options if that's okay. Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to second Mr. Grout's motion when he makes it. How's that? I do want to thank Kate and Brad for all the hard work that was done with the plan and the rest of the plan development team on this document. After hearing a lot of the questions and comments and concerns here this morning, and upon reflecting upon the discussion with the Menhaden Board, and looking at a lot of the unknown implications of some of the details with these issues involved, any of these issues involved with implementing a new management program, I'm not convinced the document is ready for prime time. My primary concerns are the addendum does not incorporate the most recent data and updated indices indicated to develop a fair and equitable new quota management program that will have huge economic impacts to the state of Maine. Addendum 4 only offers one range of years for the glass eel historic landing option, while 3 for yellow eels. That will be a very contentious issue to bring to public hearings in Maine. And Addendum 4 does not address the need for a limited silver eel landings in order to satisfy FERC licensing requirements as well, and it's something I think needs to be discussed. Given the status of the stock, I'm fully aware of the board's intent to move this action along as soon as possible, and I'm supportive of that direction as well, but I propose the go slow and easy approach that I heard at yesterday during our striped bass discussions. As I was doing some additional review of the draft MPMP and looking at the goals and in the objectives that are in support of the goal, I think that a delay is warranted to help us bring additional information to the table. And with that background, I'm prepared to make a motion of the following. I move to postpone action on draft Addendum 4 until the 2014 annual meeting, and task the TC and the the SASC to update the landings and key indices through 2013. In the interim, Maine will meet with the industry and report back to this board at this next winter meeting with a significant glass eel catch cap for consideration at the 2014 annual meeting. And if I get a second here, Mr. Chairman, I will provide some further rationale.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Is there a second to the motion? Pat Augustine? Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Pat.
I believe a delay in this next annual meeting until the next annual meeting would do the following. It'll allow for more recent information to be used in American eel quota management. It'll more fully align ASMFC management with the ESA process, and it matches up a little more clearly with the recent court decision, which delays the ESA, any ESA announcements, I believe, until 2015. It'll gauge if the most recent increase in the recruitment have increased the yellow eel abundance. It'll allow the board and the PDT time to fully explore the concept of conservation credits for yellow eel and glass eel quotas. And it will allow the board, the TC, and the PDT to move more time, to examine requirements for states to transfer yellow eels to glass eel quota.
Get special effects on your motion now, Pat. That's even better.
I had this all laid out on my iPad, and I emailed the University of Maine this morning, and I got 3,000 out of office replies from an email response, and it crashed my computer and my iPad. So we've been scrambling over here to get something down.
Thank you, Pat. Comments directed to this motion, please. Tom Foti.
There's a little difference between the stock of striped bass and the stock of eels. You know, the striped bass is not being overfished. The overfishing is not taking place, and we're deciding whether we want to be more conservative in a stock that has a great spawning stock biomass and is not threatened. We're kicking the can down the road. Are we going to get any better information or more defining information that will basically help us make decisions a year from now? No. I mean, we're just going to basically regrind some of the data, put some new data in, but it's not going to change the overall look at what's going on with the eel population. This document is, gentlemen, this document is not perfect. We understand that. That's what you go to public hearings for. That's what we start moving it for. I cannot support this motion that will delay the start of the public hearing process for another year. We've been waiting long enough. We need to do something. I mean, I remember years ago Phil Coates sitting around this table saying, as when he was chairman of the commission, said we have to move forward on eels, and he was the one pushing it from the six-inch minimum size back then. And I think we still need to start moving forward. So, again, I have great difficulty justifying this type of motion. I can't support it.
Thank you, Tom. I had Jim Gilmore, then Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe not as financially important as the glass eel fishery in Maine. We have a bait fishery in New York that, under the yellow eel provisions, we're probably harvesting between 40 and 50,000 pounds, and under the quota system, we'd be reduced down to, well, I think the number's right, 91% reduction in that fishery, which would have a significant impact on, you know, the recreational fishery. So for that reason alone, I agree with the state of Maine. We need better data on this before we proceed, and I think we need to get that before we move this forward. So we're going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Dr. Daniel?
Yeah, and I'm going to support it as well, and for maybe a little different reason, and that is to address some of the points that I brought up earlier, and trying to have answers to some of these questions for the public comment. I think it's very important for us to not be to be as transparent as we can, but to have as much information in the document as we can. Mitch made a good point about the monitoring, but if you read the last sentence of that monitoring requirement, it says for states with a glass eel fishery in one river. So that's not really going to get us the life history information that we need on a coast-wide basis if we're just doing it in Maine in one river. So we really need to think about that and recognize that a lot of these provisions in the plan right now are very restrictive and really only apply to Maine for the most part. And that's a problem that I think needs to be resolved in the addendum.
Got Richie and then Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really question the credibility of this commission if we've been working on this thing for some time. You have a depleted stock, and we're going to allow a substantial overharvest of elvers for another year at least, probably 2 years if we kick this can down the road. And it's not right. I think the only way to delay is to implement some kind of cap on Maine so that we either stop or slow the over harvest of elvers, and then take time to flush out the rest of this. But to leave this wide open and to allow this over harvest on a depleted stock, I think it would be shameful for this commission to do that.
Rob O'Reilly, then John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Virginia can support the motion. The situation is that based on last meeting where, I don't know how many hours it was, whether anyone said 5 or 5.5, but in the last half an hour, everyone was compelled to start at least to take some actions. That should probably be reflective on a very deliberative, uncertain board, and I don't think that rushing now is the answer. I think there's issues that haven't been addressed and may not be addressed within a year, but part of the discussion from past meetings was just what is the natural mortality in terms of the glass eel fishery. And the questions were asked, is it just part of the natural mortality? Do you really make a difference? And I really thought there'd be some dialogue about that coming back, and there hasn't been. And I think at that time, I talked about Brian Jessup and how Virginia, back in the late 90s, had correspondence with Brian Jessup and what his take was on glass eels versus natural mortality. Are they separable or not? And I think the comment came from Mitch at that time about it really being area specific, that there could be differences, but none of that's been talked about. We have had, I think, 14 years of supporting sampling under a mandate by ASMFC of the Elver fishery, and it always draws a lot of questions, especially from the license boards that provide the funding for that project. And here's another question that I've asked several times: how close are we to knowing anything about the correlation, I wouldn't call it a relationship, with that stage, that life stage, and any other life stage? Now, maybe that is something the technical committee is getting close to based on other comments. On the yellow eel fishery, it's surprising to me that we have the ORCS method to a small extent, not like for the glass eel fishery, but we're willing to look at putting in a buffer. I mean, that's really all it is, and yet we've got issues of data quality that maybe could be addressed in this interim, because that was really bothersome to hear about the data quality issues and also the time period involved to not possibly look at data through 2012 or 2013 in this case. So for those reasons, Virginia can support this motion.
Thank you, Rob. I've got a pretty long list here, so I'm just going to keep working down it. John? Well, go ahead for this, and then we'll start doing that.
Okay, I was just trying to keep with our parliamentary training, Mr. Chair. I am in support of this. I think one of the things is the options that came out of the PDT. A lot of these don't really mesh with what I remember as some of the options that the board was looking for in terms of transferability, in terms of glass eel quotas. The other thing, Mr. White mentioned the depleted status through the assessment. Of course, the assessment was based entirely on commercial landings. We know commercial landings have been pretty much constant here because this is an odd fishery. It only supports so much catch of yellow eels. So I don't think adding a few more years of data, if we use the DBSRA model still, will show anything other than a depleted stock based on that. But at the same time, when this assessment was completed, one of the concerns was we did see these diminishing catches of glass eels in glass eel surveys up and down the coast. However, since the assessment was completed in 2010, particularly in 2012 and 2013, we have seen two of the biggest year classes of glass eels, just remarkably huge. Especially this year, it was a record size. I mean, this once again shows the difficulty of trying to relate recruitment to the stock size that we're seeing based on our landings. But I would say that we don't know enough about eels to, at this point, I don't see this glass eel harvest that we have in Maine as causing any problem at all. If we look at the Canadian Maritimes, where they're taking much larger quantities of glass eels, and they have a very well managed fishery for both glass eels and yellow eels. And you know, frankly, I think we should wait and look these over and maybe get some better focused options here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I think John made a great suggestion of sticking with the rules that we've imposed on ourselves about, one in favor, one in opposition. So John was in favor. My list right now is Representative Minor, Lance Stewart, Deborah Rock, and Doug Grout. Representative Minor, are you in favor or in opposition?
Actually, I'm trying to formulate an opinion that requires, I guess, an answer to a question.
Go ahead then. Go ahead.
I'm curious as to whether the postponement date is an indication as to how long this further study would take, or whether it's one based more on the economics of the state of Maine. I've heard a lot about wanting to get better information, more information, but I'm unsure in terms of our staff as to how long that would take, and if that information were available at a meeting date sooner, assuming that the information on a cap was going to come, I think, in February of 2014, what the necessity is for, let's say, 3 more meetings.
See if Kate can take a shot at that one for you.
We do have the landings data and the annual Young of the Year recruitment data. That information is updated and included in the FMP review. So we could add that information, the updated indice data, to the indices analysis that we have in the report. However, the model, as was brought up, the DBS array model, and the other modeling approaches that were used in the assessment, the stock assessment subcommittee members are already heavily tasked with doing menhaden, lobster, sturgeon, and other assessments. So it would be very difficult to probably have them come together and review those models. So that would take a greater amount of time and potentially could lead to delays in other assessments. But the individual Young of the Year surveys, that's, as I mentioned, updated with the FMP reviews, and that would be easy information to obtain. Having the technical committee evaluate if all of those indices taken together would lead to a change in the status is a much larger conversation, obviously.
So I think that the response is, depending on the rigor and the complexity of the analysis the board wants, has a lot to do with the timeline needed.
And so I guess hearing that, my opinion is that I think that date, that postponement date, should be as soon as possible. I think there will be people watching what we do and why we do it. And so if it's for a scientific reason, then I'd rather have good data. If it is for putting, or the illusion is to put it off, and I'm not sure, I'm convinced that that's not what this is all about, but if people feel that it was just to set a date, I don't know how the other activity, ESA and whatever, how they will view what we have not done or what we have done. So I guess I would be looking for the soonest possible date rather than the next annual meeting.
Great, thank you. Let's keep going down the list. As I mentioned, John Clark was in favor of the motion. Lance, are you in opposition?
No, I'm unequivocal right now, but I just wanted to add something that I keep seeing from board meeting to board meeting on eel. And it's the point that we think we own, particularly, we have a real good management control of the population within our own estuaries or within our own states. And this involves a different mindset in an international fishery with a tremendously different international recruitment process. You can't have a Scandinavian female with a Spanish male that spawns in a sargasso. So a lot of these things are uncontrollable. So even though we think we have a relationship with the glacial fishery quantity and the silver fishery within our state, we may be spinning our wheels and doing a lot of work for the science of it that really doesn't apply. So one of the things for the technical committee, I don't see a lot of it in front of us, is a poll of the Canadians and the Europeans of how their fishery exists. Just some of the basic statistics on what their glacial fishery is, what their silver fishery is, what their aquaculture production is. These are things we're, right at the beginning phases of trying to implement. They've been at it for a little bit longer. I think Mitch would, verify that. So, you know, in order to do proper science, you have to have it all in front of you. And I think that's one thing, just a suggestion that, to the board, that the PDT may need more time to get more valid information so we can start, you know, looking at managing this fishery more realistically. Thanks.
Thank you, Lance. We have a new representative from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here today. Welcome, Deborah Rock. Can you comment, please?
Thank you. Good morning. I just have a question for the technical committee. So there's a lot of uncertainty underlying the models and the information, and I'm just curious if another year of data will help reduce that uncertainty. You know, I think we, the Fish and Wildlife Service, that in the lack of information, we support a precautionary approach, and so I just would ask the technical committee that question.
Brad, can you handle that?
Sure. In terms of the landings data, I think we're still going to see that we're at a period of very low harvest relative to a few decades ago. So if we add 2011, 2012, maybe 2013, I don't think we'll see a very different picture in the indices and the harvest trends. In terms of getting more information on looking at transferability, it could be a benefit to mine the literature, look at what Europe's doing, and gain, you know, perhaps a better model or a better understanding of the assumptions involved. So those are the two different topics. But in terms of harvest data, I think it's going to be a very similar picture.
Satisfied? Thank you. I've got a pretty long list here. Doug, are you in favor or in opposition or still undecided, I guess is the third category?
No, I'm in opposition, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
I believe that we do have a document that's very close to being ready to go out, and just so people don't think I'm hypocritical because I was about ready to make a motion to make a change to it. Believe me, I came here with the intent of making a very simple, easy change, adding a sub-option to just give states with low yellow eel harvest a foot in the door for the future if we ever get a change in our stock status. That was it. I believe we have been working on this for a while. We took this out of the past, our last addendum, and we moved forward with action on that. We've come forward with this addendum. I think it's time to take this out to public hearing. For Maine's concerns, I certainly understand, you know, the impact of going in a single year from 18,000 pounds harvested down to 5,000 or 6,000 pounds would be a dramatic impact. But I also see in here an option for delayed implementation of these closures or quotas. We could have a phase-in to try and make this something that would be a little easier for them to take, and who knows, there could be some information that might come down the road in either a new stock assessment or some of those life cycle stage studies that could provide different data that might provide a different picture in the future. But at this point, I feel that we have something that's very close to being ready. I think we can get it ready today, and I will oppose this certainly without any. There's no quota up here until we get to February, so I can't even begin to support this right now.
Thank you, Doug. I've got 4 more people on my list. I think what I'm going to do is go through those 4. We've been at it for a couple hours now, so I think folks are tired. Pat, do you have something that will? You're not on the list. What's going on? You want to be on the list? All right, I got 5 people. Then we're going to.
I'm on a lot of lists.
You're waving around like it was an emergency. I want to make sure you're all right. So I've got, like I said, we got 5 people on the list. We'll go through those 5, and then the board can decide if you're in a position to vote. We'll vote. If you want to break, we'll take a break. So let's see where we are after these 5. Adam Nowalski.
I'll make this simple, Mr. Chairman. I move to amend to postpone to the spring meeting. And if I get a second to that, then I'll briefly speak on it.
So Adam, just to be clear, you're not postponing this motion. You're changing the wording in the motion to postpone the addendum.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Got it. Thank you. Is there a second to Adam's motion? Mr. Lustig, thank you. You want to comment, Adam?
Yeah, very briefly. I think that the points that were brought forward in the original motion, I think to give Maine the opportunity to address a number of the concerns that this addendum was meant to, I applaud them for doing so. I applaud the members of the audience for being here and being willing participants in the process. I want to give them every opportunity to do that, and then use that information that they come back with, as well as a compilation of the landings and indices data that are identified herein. And then going to the spring meeting would give the PDT time to take into consideration what Maine brings forth to us at the winter meeting, to go ahead and craft that into consideration for a draft addendum consideration at that time. Thank you.
All right, so it's the spring meeting when you want to see the next version of this based on what Maine brings back at the winter meeting. Is that right? If this addendum was, or amendment was approved. I've got Paul Diodati, Terry Stockwell, Dennis Abbott, and Pat Augustine. So Paul.
I was going to make a substitute motion, but perhaps I'll wait.
Thank you. I think we can get pretty complex here pretty quickly. Terry Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can support Adam's motion to amend, and I want to provide some rationale to the board following up on Representative Minor's questions. And after consultation with Kate, it was quite clear to me that the TC was quite overwhelmed. For Maine's fishery, as Pat explained, is a spring fishery. We're going to go barreling down the road here and in a Ferrari, or maybe a Yugo. The spring will be here before we know it, and so our intent was to bring a catch cap for 2014 and implement it through an emergency action as some demonstrated measure to the board that we take the goals of the addendum very seriously. There have been a number of issues raised around the table here. You know, and I guess my question to Kate and Brad would be, can you do this work in time for the, you know, are we going to be ready in May, or do we need, I mean, or do you need until the summer or the fall?
Again, it depends on the complexity of the analysis that's performed. I mean, if we're doing the board is familiar with the turn of the crank assessments, that would be almost impossible for the SAS, given its makeup and their workloads on other assessments, to come back for the February or for the May meeting. If it's just something like updating indices, that's, you know, relatively easy to do, and we can just plug those in. But you know, knowing how that's going to influence things, as Brad says, we're likely not to see much of a change.
Your follow-up, Terry?
Yeah, quick follow-up, Mr. Chair. We're on the cusp of proposing a brand new quota management system for two different fisheries. It's going to be fraught with issues and problems. We all suffered through Monday's Menhaden meeting and several more where we beat to death the episodic events proposal on 1% of the fishery. I mean, Maine's Elver fishery is a huge deal. Just speaking on behalf of Maine, we don't want to rush this along. You know, we understand there has to be conservation measures. Incorporating the most recent data in the indices is into the final decision that we're going to be implementing a quota management, likely implementing a quota management program, and it makes sense to me. Thank you.
Please tell me there's no such thing as an Elver episodic event. We don't have to go down that road.
You just wait.
I can only imagine. Dennis Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I put my hand up, I was going to speak to the main motion, and the amendment satisfies some of my concern, because on the main motion, I was probably not so supportive of the first half of it, but where we say in the interim that Maine will meet with industry and report back to the board a significant glass eel catch for 2000 at the winter meeting. I think that if we vote to amend and it's successful, then I think we really have to be clear in what we expect to get back in February. Kate's saying that, and I agree that, and I feel that no amount of studies or work by them is going to provide us with scientific information which is going to be conclusive and satisfying to all the parties. So it takes us back to the point of when we do something. But I do want whatever action is supposed to take place between now and the spring meeting to be spelled out very clearly so that we have expectations and we will see results by that meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Pat Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is more direct and simple, I think. To the technical committee and Brad, in response to the questions and concerns that Dr. Daniel had relative to this transferability pound for pound, you indicated that you'd have to get some direction from the board to do that, or can we agree to do that? And can you do that within the time frame we're talking about so it could be included in the document? I'm not sure how big a task that is. I'm not sure it's just strictly number crunching or having a computer spew out a bunch of combinations of X number of these for those. Can you give us some enlightenment on that, and can you do it in time to go in the document?
Well, I think Kate really just explained the situation. It's a very difficult time frame between the spring meeting. We could certainly accumulate the harvest data, the indices data, and produce information on that, but to do more with the transferability, I think would take a lot of time. And Kate does have a better understanding of the scheduling than I do, I think, the staff.
Okay, but we still don't have I need a clear answer. Can you do it in a year? I understand it's complex and it's complicated, but can you do it in a year? What we're doing is we're putting a document out there to the public, and everyone who reads transfer from one Albert's glass seals to yellow or silver, they may know what it means. Most of them don't. Say, well, gee whiz, yeah, they figured out what that number's going to be. And to either a yellow eel fisherman to be able to get a pound for pound of glass eels for a pound of yellow eels, man, he's going to go crazy. He'll love it. But there's no sense of what that means. He's taking $5 a pound for yellow eels, and he's going to make 2,200 pounds. $2,200 for a pound of glass eel. So we need some number in there. Maybe just pull it out of the air and say it's 2,732 and a half glass eels equals 7 yellows. I don't know.
A year would obviously be more time to produce that information, so I think that would be something that's more possible than a spring meeting. But the guidance has been pretty clear from the Stock Assessment Subcommittee, from the PDT, the stock assessment. Mortality has to be reduced, and the basis for doing that is setting up a quota system. And if you want to get to transferability, then you have to have a quota system to base that on. So I think the guidance has been fairly clear from the different committees.
That helps. Thank you.
All right. Had a couple more hands. We're at the point where I was planning on breaking, but that was before this motion to amend came up. Do you guys want to power through till noon? It's only another 40 minutes or so. All right, let's keep pushing through. I had Rick Bellavance, then Roy Miller. Rick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just for my own satisfaction or clarification, I'm not really following the Maine will meet with industry and report back to the board with a significant glass eel cap. I guess I need just some clarification as to what that could mean. Like, as I read it in my head, 50,000 pounds is a significant glass eel cap, and I just like some direction or the intent of what the original maker of the motion meant by that, and if there's a way to wordsmith it to a way that implies that there'll be some conservation equivalent there, if that makes sense.
Pat, can you comment on that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The department has not had any meetings to date with industry, so our intent would be to have probably 2 or 3 coast-wide meetings to have discussions regarding the existence of the draft of the PDT, make sure they have an understanding of that and why we're asking for the delay, but also to get a better to have the industry to have a better understanding that there are going to be reductions coming. We understand that, they understand it, but I think to the point made earlier from Representative Minor, there is obviously an economic component into this as we make political decisions and discussions. So the meetings will happen. I've been reluctant to say what a significant reduction would be, only because I haven't had those meetings. But my feeling is that they're going to have to be somewhere in between the range of 25 and 40% reduction going into next year's fishery. And then beyond that, based on the way we envision the existence of the PDT report now, we know it's going to be another step down, but where that will go is unseen and uncertain. So that's, I hope that clarifies. I do want to, since I've got the floor, Mr. Chairman, just quickly say there was some comments made earlier about this from Mr. Grout about this going to a minimum size, basically eliminating these glass eel fisheries coast-wide with the exception of Maine and South Carolina. I think it's important to point out that Maine at that time was in the process of eliminating our silver eel fisheries. There were a few small weir fisheries left that were grandfathered, and those are all but now eliminated as well, and we're prepared to fully eliminate those going forward. So we have made changes in order to justify the existence of our glass eel fishery, and I thought that was an important point to reiterate. Thank you.
All right, I had Paul, you had deferred your comment earlier, so you want to comment now? Please go ahead, please.
It's consistent with Rick's last comment about clarification, and I think you helped just now, but I prefer it be in the motion. Up here it says eel catch cap, but you're really talking about not a cap, a reduction, and I prefer if cap said reduction, and I'd prefer if it said what you were reducing from. Is it the 2005 to 2010 average annual lendings? Is that would be a significant reduction. So I'd like to see more specifications put in the motion. That would make me feel better about it.
Thanks, Paul. Pat, you should think
Can
about
we
that.
take a quick break so we can wordsmith that, Mr. Chair?
You want to do some wordsmithing? We've got about a half an hour before lunch. We want to take a 10-minute break. Hopefully we can, oh, Adam, go ahead. You're on the list for a while.
I was just going to suggest is that I hear a lot of the comments getting back to the main motion, and maybe it might make sense to dispense with this amendment, then take a break to allow time to address the main motion.
Yeah, I think you're right. Folks are commenting on both of these, and I think folks are having a difficulty keeping the two separate because, you know, the notion of to postpone or not to postpone is I think some folks are hung up on, you know, how long to postpone, and some folks are wrestling with should there be any postponement at all. So I think they're clearly the two are intertwined. Are folks comfortable with voting on the motion to amend right now, or is there more discussion needed on the motion to amend, just that one part? All right, I see no hands saying that folks need more discussion on the motion to amend. Sorry, David.
I just want to make sure that if this is defeated now and ultimately we decide after, you know, some detail is put here that it turns out spring is the appropriate time, that we haven't forfeited that opportunity.
I mean, I think with any commission actions, if there's a need for the board to get together and review progress on a document or review information, I think that's fair. I think Mr. Kelleher was originally saying, you know, the next decision on this addendum would be deferred until the annual meeting. But I think there may be some progress check-ins along the way if necessary, if that helps you. Mr. Abbott.
Thank you. Regarding our action on the amendment, it simply says we'll postpone to the spring meeting. And in that is the assumption that we're postponing action on draft addendum 4, is what we're saying. So after we vote on this, does that mean that we're all done talking about today, draft addendum 4? Yes or no? It would, in my opinion, we would conclude our discussions on draft addendum 4 if that becomes the main motion and is voted upon.
Well, I think the main motion would become delaying action until the spring meeting. So they're not. Mr. Nowalski's intent was not to delay action on the main motion. It was to change the wording in the main motion to read, move to postpone action on draft addendum 4 until the 2014 spring meeting. So then I think then the main motion, the board would then deliberate on whether they want to postpone to spring or not. Is everybody comfortable with that concept? All right. Any other discussion needed before we vote, before you folks vote on the motion to amend? All right. The states can caucus while I'm reading this in. That'll speed things up a little. Move to amend to postpone to the spring meeting, May 2014. Motion by Mr. Nowalski, seconded by Mr. Lustig. States could caucus. We'll take a vote in a minute. All right, are folks ready to vote? All right, let's go ahead and vote on the motion to amend. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your right hand. Keep them up. Hands down. Those opposed, like sign. Abstentions? Or null votes, N-U-L-L. Got one null vote from Rhode Island. So the motion carries 14 in favor, 1 in opposition, and 1 null vote. So now the main motion becomes to postpone this until the spring meeting of 2014. Pat, there was a couple of requests to wordsmith this a little bit. Do you need some time to do that now, or do you have wording available, or are you comfortable with the motion as it is? All right, quick minute. Talks amongst yourselves. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. You can talk. You'll be the filler.
I like that. I'm filling. Yeah. I was adamant not doing it until next annual meeting because I look at, by the time we do this, it'll be 2016. If I'm looking at, if this is the schedule I'm looking at, we could do something and get it in place at the annual meeting next year, maybe approve a plan, go out in the summer for public hearings. I can support this now. I mean, I think that's reasonable. I think we gather some more information, and it sounds like we can do that. So I think we can vote on this right after Pat wordsmiths a little bit, and then we don't have to come back at 1 o'clock.
Well, there's some other projects on the agenda. Dr. Daniel.
Yeah, I'll continue. I'll be filler too. To Dennis's point, I think it would be my hope that we would absolutely come back. We got a lot more to do other than just this, and provide some direction to staff on some of the concerns that were raised around the table so that they're not spinning their wheels. I think they need to be able to understand what the criticisms were and the need for additional options or taking some things out or whatever it needs to be. But I think we need to have at least some time to provide staff some direction.
Yeah, I think the PDT has kind of indicated they've given all they can give on this one. They need some more input from the board if there's additional options or additional directions you guys want them to chase down. So I think that will be pretty important discussion, Lewis. Pat Keller, are you ready to go?
So I think what we've tried to do is encompass Paul's comments to give a little more specificity. So move to postpone action on draft addendum 4 until the 2014 spring meeting, and task the TC and the SASC to update the landing and key indices through 2013. In the interim, Maine will meet with industry and report back to the board a 25 to 40% reduction of glass eel catch from 2013 harvest for the 2014 the catches, excuse me, so the catch reduction of glass eel catch from the 2013 harvest for the 2014. Going to report back for the 2014 season, and we'll report back at the winter meeting.
Does that reflect your changes?
Yes.
All right, thank you. This isn't really the official parliamentary approach here. You know, we had a main motion that was amended, but this is in response to some of the requests around the table. So I'm hoping this speeds it up and we don't have to go through multiple motions to amend to get the wording right. So if someone's uncomfortable with this approach, you know, please let me know. I had Richie White, then Rob O'Reilly.
Question. When the state of Maine comes back and let's say they pick 30% reduction, and let's say this board wanted 35, is there a way of us voting to make that happen, or is all this voluntary on the state of Maine?
Yeah, I think it's this is my interpretation, and Pat, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a voluntary action taken by Maine in the interim while Addendum 4 is being completed. In other words, Maine's going to be voluntarily more conservative than the existing fishery management plan at the time. Is this a follow-up to the same point, Dennis? Go ahead, please.
I'd ask Maine the question, which I think I know the answer to, that by the time they report back to us in May, the season will have already been concluded for 2014. Is that not correct? Pretty close.
Pat, can you respond?
The season will not have been fully completed, but it'll be very close at that time. So,
but Maine's going to report back what their cap is going to be at our February meeting.
At the February meeting,
yeah.
Correct.
So, and your season will not have started by then.
That's correct.
Okay. On down the line, I had Rob O'Reilly, Bill Adler, and then Doug Grout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question just is on the commercial data. Is there an expectation that there will at least be pretty solid preliminary data for 2013 by that point?
Pat, can you comment on that? He's asking if you're going to be in a position to know what your 2013 landings are so that when you calculate your reduction, it can be based on pretty solid data.
Yeah, I can tell you right now.
He can tell you right now, Rob. And yeah, he will.
In 2012, we landed 20,700 pounds, and in 2013, we landed 18,253 pounds.
And those are robust landings. You're comfortable with those numbers?
Yes.
Yeah. Fair enough. Rob, follow up?
It's also on the yellow eel, and how much of the 2013 data will we have if there's changes to the time frame for quota setting?
I'm not sure I understand the question, because Maine, I don't believe, is proposing any changes to their yellow eel
we're going to
fishery.
come back and look at the addendum overall, right? So
you're thinking for additional options or additional years worth of data to be included in the addendum? When will the states have the 2013 yellow eel landings? Is that your question?
Or are we going to just stop at 2010? We are now.
The PDT has been very clear in their recommendation of use of data only included in the stock assessment. If the board would like to request the PDT to include additional years, that is a motion that can be made.
Oh, follow up, Rob, then I'll get to you, Bill.
Thank you. Come on, me?
Rob, go ahead with your follow-up, then we'll come back to you, Bill.
That was a tie, Bill, so I would like to make a motion when the time is right to include more modern data.
Yeah, let's decide what the board would like to do with the timing of this and postponement, and then I think it gets to Lewis's point, which, make sure we have clear direction for the PDT and staff. Bill Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at this thing now. When you're saying postpone action on draft addendum, the action is approving it to go to public hearing is what you're talking about. And then the last line there, it says reduction of glass eel catch from the 2013 harvest for the 2014 season at the winter meeting. So in other words, if May, we're taking it out to public hearing, and then it comes back to the next meeting, and we get approval or whatever, what's the harvest for the 2014 season? That would be next year. What are we doing? And that was my first one question there. Is that correct, basically? And secondly, there was a mention earlier about finding out what the Canadian fishery is. I think, I don't know if Lance made it or something. And is there any way that any of that information can come back to us as well? Because I think it's interesting to see. Those were my questions.
I'll have Terry respond to the first one on the timing of events.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me see if I kind of untangle this for you, Bill. Our intent is to come is to meet with our industry members between now and the winter meeting, and come back to the board with a 25 to 40% reduction of our catch from last year, which was 18,000 and change, for the 2014 season. And we're doing this voluntarily in order to address the issues we've heard from the board about the need to have immediate action on a mortality reduction, and the delay. And if this motion is approved, it will postpone the action until we have the updated landings and key indices of 3 more years.
Thank you, Terry. Bill, you have a follow-up?
Just a quick follow-up, Bill. It won't require any board action at the winter meeting. Pat would implement the 2014 quote under his emergency rule authority.
All right. So the 2014 quota that you guys work out will be in effect, and even though what might happen here is the addendum 4 will go out to public hearing, let's say, following the May meeting.
Correct, and that would be whatever action is moved ahead in addendum 4 would be for the 2015 fishing year.
All set, Bill? All right. I had Doug Grout next on my list.
Well, I appreciate this change here because it does give a little bit of something we can grab onto, and let's say we come back and it's a just for the sake of argument a 35% reduction over 2018. You have some kind of mechanism what over 2013 landings. Right? My thought is you do your best that you see the landings coming to that level, which let's just say for example they're 15,000 pounds, and that's where you're going to cut off. Or what happens if late reports come in and you end up landing 18,000 pounds? Would you take some action in the following year to have some compensation, or have you thought about that?
I think the the passage of the draft of the addendum 4 will be beyond that as far as additional reductions, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. I should state for the board's clarification and information that the state is getting ready to implement an electronic swipe card system for our landings program, specifically for Elvers. Colonel Featherington mentioned it when he briefly touched on some enforcement issues. It will be real-time landings, so I think that will definitely be in the situation to help us avoid any overruns.
I had Mitch's hand up for a long time, then I'll come back to you, Terry. Okay, go ahead, Mitch.
I just wanted to point out briefly that I'm quite confident that when Maine reports back in the at the winter meeting, it will not be reporting back merely the 25 to 40% reduction, but I'm presuming that Maine's also going to be reporting back an enhanced suite of measures that are designed to eliminate or at least seriously curtail the poaching concerns, which I know has driven a lot of the concerns of the PDT and the TC. And I'm happy to say I've been working, the industry has been working with Pat and the DMR to that effect, and I think that what they're going to roll out is going to be very impressive.
Thank you, Mitch. Terry, you mentioned you had a follow-up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to Pat's comment, is that there have been some questions about the reason for Maine to meet with our industry. This reduction, whatever it's going to be, is going to require us to scale the fishery to that number, and so we'll be working with the industry to look at different options that will allow us to stay within whatever our quota is going to be. And I just off the top of my head, it could be gear limitations, spatial limitations. These are the devil in the detail issues that we need to work out very specifically with our industry.
Thank you, Terry. Other comments on this? Adam.
I was just going to offer that perhaps the wordage of a 25 to 40% reduction, I think, probably sets certain expectations around the table. Clearly, it sets the expectation of a minimum 25%, but should Maine decide that 41% or something, might a minimum 25% reduction be more appropriate here versus pigeonholing yourselves into that range? Something you might want to consider here.
I don't think you have to worry about that one.
All right, other comments? Are folks ready to vote on the main motion? All right, I think we've, folks look talked out. I'll read the motion in, Joe, while the states begin their caucus. Move to postpone action on draft addendum 4 until 2014 spring meeting and task the technical committee and stock assessment subcommittee. All right. They need to caucus quieter, Joe? Is that what you're saying? All right. I'll start all over. Move to postpone action on draft addendum 4 until 2014 spring meeting and task the technical committee and stock assessment subcommittee to update the landings and key indices through 2013. In the interim, Maine will meet with industry and report back to the board a 25 to 40% reduction of glass eel catch from 2013 harvest for the 2014 season at the winter meeting. Everyone's all set on caucusing? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Hands down. Those in opposition, like sign. 2 in opposition. Any abstentions? Any null votes? N-U-L-L. All right. Looks like 16 votes in favor, 2 in opposition, no abstentions, no null votes. So I think that is the plan for addendum 4. I think we've got a few minutes before lunch starts. I think it's probably worthwhile to have some discussion on additional direction and additional guidance to the plan development team. And then after lunch, we can jump into the update on the ESA listing and the proposal from the state of North Carolina, if that sounds good to everyone. So for additional guidance, I've got hands coming up this side. I'll go Lewis, Rob, Tom, Representative Kamiga, and Doug.
Thank you, Bob. And if there's any objection, obviously, to any of these things, please. I'm just trying to bring up my concerns and what I'll be looking for in the next iteration of the addendum. One is some type of an option for states outside of Maine and South Carolina to develop a glass eel quota that is visible, something you can look at and see. I don't know if that's going to be possible or not, but at least to get the technical committee looking again at, and whether the conversion factor works or not, who knows. The other option is I think we can shorten the document a little bit, because I'd be very careful and very concerned about rollover. And I would suggest that we remove the rollover provision from the plan. I mean, that's analysis that really doesn't need to be done from my perspective. Because if we do a rollover for eels, then why aren't we rolling over summer flounder and some of these overfishing species? So we're setting a precedent for ourselves that I don't think we want to set. And then one of my big issues, obviously, is going to be some way to allow for an aquaculture allowance. I think the board generally agrees that aquaculture is a good option for this fishery, and domestic production is a positive thing for us and for our states. But right now, there's not a mechanism in the plan that would allow for that to occur that I've been able to see. And it says only 5% of South Carolina's 70 pounds is not really going to be a whole lot of opportunity for South Carolina, and there's no opportunity for anybody else in the plan. So those are the two biggest issues that I'd like to see some additional information on. And then if we could get some clarification, I guess, on the natural mortality rates that Brad was talking about, and somehow being able to do some extinction factor work that shows, generally from population ecology, how many females does it really take to create 53,000 pounds of elders? It's not 9. I know that, based on just natural mortality rates before the glass eel stage. But clarifying that, because a lot of the letters talk about that, a lot of the correspondence that I've seen have said that, I think we need to try to do our best to clarify that technical issue with help from the technical committee. Thank you.
Lewis, Kate has a question from her position as PDT chair for you.
So you're looking for an option for states to develop a glass eel quota. So this is something separate from the yellow to glass eel transfer?
And that's really up to the board too. Okay. I mean, if folks don't agree, then I'll back off. But my concern is that the way I understand the transfer would be that I would have to come in and somehow figure out and convince the technical committee and the board that, if I could convince you that 1,000 pounds of yellow eels equals 1,000 pounds of elvers, I'm good. Because that's really all I need. I'm not trying to develop a glass eel fishery in North Carolina. I'm not sure many of it are with the mess that's Maine's got with their enforcement issues and stuff. So, but I'm wondering if, like I said in my earlier comments, if we're just going to give 2,000 pounds of eels to states that have no eel landings, yellow eels, that's a little bit contrary to me. I'd rather have those yellow eels, ultimately silver eels, going offshore. I'd rather have an opportunity for glass eels and protect those females. I mean, that's the issue. I don't know whether it's possible or practical. The service is voting against this motion to delay gives me a little bit of concern, and I don't know how worried to be about the endangered species issue. I mean, anybody can petition an agency to be an endangered species. Is it reasonable? And is there really a chance? And if there is, that's going to throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing. But I think we need to be open and forthright about that too.
Thank you, Lewis. Kate, do you have another follow-up?
Just to follow up, the 2,000-pound allowance was just given to states, a recommendation that it be included to be given to states so that New Hampshire wouldn't have to monitor a 68-pound quota for their yellow eel fishery. Certainly the board would have the option to remove that provision that the PDT put in. The PDT and SAS and Technical Committee has been pretty adamant in following the recommendations of the stock assessment, which said that opening up new fisheries on any life stage would be inconsistent with the recommendations of the peer review panel. And if the board is looking to put in an option for the opening of a glass eel fishery, the Technical Committee and PDT has discussed this at length, and there is just no value that we can come up with. So the board will have to specify what the amount is that they would want if they want to open up a fishery, and this would have to come from the board.
That's fair.
All right, thank you, Liz. I'm going to try to do this without a whole lot of motion. So does anyone object to the suggestions or recommendations Louis just made? Terry?
I generally agree with your suggestions, Louis. The one issue I do have some concern with is your suggestion that we eliminate the rollover. We've just incorporated in our Atlantic herring fishery, and it makes the monitoring easier, and it reduces the incentive to lowball the projections. You know, if the industry gets shut down early, then they have the opportunity to harvest again the next year. There's far less opposition from the industry for working within a quota system. I mean, I suspect there's going to be significant enough cut in the quota to keep the buffer even.
And I mean, I was just trying to save time and effort. But if we want to, if the general consensus is to leave it in there for public comment, that's fine. But again, think striped bass, think summer flounder, think et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's cool to leave it in if you want to.
How about it gets left in, and then the board will make a decision when they revisit this document in May. If at that time you don't want it, you can cut it out. Does that sound all right? I've got a long list of folks up this side, and then a couple in the back. So I'll just keep moving along ahead. Rob O'Reilly next.
Yeah, I'll be quick, Mr. Chairman. The first part of that motion I took as being all-encompassing to the postponement, and so I'm not sure what the information is coming from the TC as far as revising the quota years for yellow eel. And is that something that it's anticipated can be done today, or would that be done at the spring meeting to add on 2011 and 2012, because I wouldn't expect 2013 to be final data overall for the commercial data. So I guess that's a question.
I think if you want to add that, Rob, this is probably the right time to ask the PDT to include that, and they can work on that, as they can between now and the spring meeting. So, go ahead, Kate.
Yes, if you can provide the specific guidance of what years you'd like to include, since the PDT has maintained that they only want to include data through 2010. And again, if we were waiting until the May meeting when the TC comes back with their report, then if we were providing it then that could eventually, require the PDT to go back and develop the options, and then it would be August that the board would be looking at the addendum for public comments. So
Rob, follow up?
Kate, you talked very quickly there. I think I caught most of that. But the request would be to add 2011 and 12. I assume that the 1998 to 2010 from other meetings are the important years. I understand the situation with the assessment and also with the statements about risk, but at the same time I know with the multipliers in there and what's been done, we probably should consider at least going out to 2012 without changing the baseline, the bottom of the baseline.
Rob, is that for just yellow eels?
That is just for yellow eels.
All right, thank you. Tom O'Connell.
Yeah, just to add on in regards to the yellow eel option, we didn't really get to it today, but I was prepared to offer a suggestion and would ask that it be considered. I understand that the staff don't want to go beyond 2010 because of that was used in the stock assessment. It doesn't mean you can't use more recent years to look at the allocation and then base a percentage reduction to get you at lower than that 2010 assessment period. I support the idea that Rob suggested. But with that, I think there still will be some pretty significant disproportional impacts to states like New York, Maryland, Virginia to a lesser extent. And I would ask that incorporate into the quota options a consideration of two things. Not allowing a state's quota to be higher than its current landings, with the exception of the 2,000-pound minimum, trying to reduce harvest, not expand. And two, perhaps establishing a cap for which the reductions would not exceed. For example, maybe it's 20%. No one state's reduction should be higher than 20%. And we need to look at what that would be to ensure that we do achieve a reduction below that 2010 time period. So I would ask that to be considered. I think it would provide a greater balance of the level of impact amongst the states.
Thanks, Tom. Any objection to adding Tom or Rob's suggestions plural, to the document? All right, seeing none. Representative Kumiga, had you next.
I had one question on the stock assessment where the harvest data. Is there any correlation between effort, and I don't know how you'd measure that. I mean, I know if, for example, you were using glass eel catch and the price were to go back to $10 a pound next year, the catch would crash, but it wouldn't be an indication of the stock abundance. It would be an indication of the fact that people aren't fishing. And I understand that some of the reason that the yellow eel harvest has been down, that some of the demand isn't there because horseshoe crab and striped bass fisheries have been reduced, so there's not as much demand for yellow eels. And the other thing is silver eel escapement. Is there a mechanism for, or could there be a mechanism for states that do something, a turbine project or something that increases, they can demonstrate they've increased silver eel escapement? Would there be a mechanism for that to allow for an increased quota, either yellow eel or glass eel?
Well, I think to your last point, Walter, actually those provisions are already in there. The draft addendum as it's written right now allows for states to petition the board saying, highlighting habitat restoration or other management considerations, power plant issues, whatever it may be, that could justify a change in their quota. So that provision's already there. Do you have a comment on anything else?
Just a quick comment on the silver eel escapement. I know that the Stock Assessment Subcommittee has an interest in looking at what Europe has done in some countries to use escapement as a metric. So that will be something that I think we will explore. And then getting back to the catch per unit effort, the stock assessment did review all the available data, and we found that fishery-dependent data was not as strong, and so the stock assessment results are mainly supported by the fishery-independent data. So the information wasn't that good for that purpose, for the stock assessment.
Thanks. Doug, I think I had you next.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. First of all, I agree with Lewis's request to have some kind of a mechanism for states that originally didn't have a elver fishery to get a way in other than through the yellow eel transfer, because some states don't have much of a yellow eel to be able to transfer. I would like to also have some kind of option in there that ties states that don't have an elver fishery, give them an access to an elver fishery once we get a stock assessment determination that we're no longer depleted. And originally I was just going to allow us to transfer that 2,000-pound minimum yellow eel quota, but if there's another mechanism that would just say, okay, once we have a stock status that we're not depleted, then all states will have some minimum elver quota that they could use. But again, I'd like to have the option tied to stock status change from what we're at. So is that clear?
So are you saying no change in the glass eel fishery until we get another assessment? Or are you saying when a new assessment comes along, you would like to allow consideration of additional fisheries?
I'm saying once we have a stock assessment in the future that says that we are not depleted, no longer depleted, then there would be an option in there that would allow for either a minimum quota or to allow the yellow eel transfer of the minimum 2,000 pounds to the overfishery.
Would a provision in the document that essentially said, you know, based on the next assessment, the board will reassess the stock status and glass eel provisions?
Well, what I was hoping is if we put it in this document, we wouldn't have to go through another addendum to be able to do it, which would take some time. That's what I'm trying to get it in here, and then if we get this status, the board approves the assessment, then this measure would be available to take, would be a quota that would be available to us.
I think the board would have to go through the addendum process either way to make changes to the glass eel fishery based on a positive stock assessment finding.
Why is that?
That's
stock status determination. We have a measure that's a stock status determination. We're putting something in that's just a management measure that says this will be triggered by this stock status determination.
If we added this provision in and the states wanted to go forward with the transferability, then this would prohibit states from opening up their glass eel fisheries because we wouldn't have a stock assessment. We don't have one planned right now, and this last one took 4 years. So if we have that provision in there, then the states wouldn't be able to do the transferability.
Again, it would only be an option that we have in there. And I understand that, you know, that we have two options. One, that we'd have some kind of access without that determination. The other one would be dependent on.
All right. I mean, we can put an option in there, see what it looks like when we come back in May. I'm not, you know, it kind of sounds like you're working toward a specification setting process where, based on changes in the eel stock status, the board could then take board action to adjust quotas from year to year. Is that kind of where you're going, maybe?
You could do that, or you could put it in ahead of time. It could be a specification, but the point is that it'd be quicker than going through an addendum.
All right, we'll work with the PDT and try to figure that out. Hang on, Rob. Moving on down the list here, I had Mitch, Terry, and Dave Simpson, and Rob. Hopefully we can get those four in the next 5 or so minutes. Then we have to break for lunch. So, Mitch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As one of my questions earlier suggested, the very best approach to a glass eel fishery management requires serious study and consideration of the size of a watershed that you're taking the glass eels from. And I would ask that the PDT just incorporate that concept, which I believe the members of the PDT agree and understand that is the case. And if we're concerned about proper ecosystem management, we need to understand that it's not just a matter of how many glass eels to take, but how many glass eels to take can we sustainably take relative to the size of watersheds. And there is information that exists, and I'd be happy to share with some of our technical staff some of the work that's being done that might help guide them in that regard. Thank you.
Kate, do you have a comment?
So are you looking for something beyond in the transferability plan where it says states would develop the plans and they could incorporate their specific state information on their watersheds, or are you looking for the PDT to come up with the specific metrics for all states?
Well, I don't know if it's fair for me to suggest that the TC has to do, you know, how the work should be done, but I do think that as to Lewis's point and Doug's point, like how would a state, what alternatives are there to yellow eel transferability? I hear there's a sense in the room that some people feel that the issue should be separated, that if a glass eel fishery is justifiable, a state should be able to get in whether it had a small history of yellow eel harvesting or a large history of yellow eel harvesting. And I see a few people nodding their heads. I appreciate that. And so I guess I'm suggesting that should either be an alternative approach to be considered, or at least to incorporate concepts of watershed size into the existing framework.
So it would be kind of like similar to the requirements that are in the transferability plan, but it would just be for the glass eel fishery.
Yeah, fair, I think, yes.
All right. I had David Simpson, then Rob O'Reilly. No pressure with lunch, bearing down on me, David.
I'm between everyone and lunch. So I appreciate that you pointed out that there is a sort of, conservation enhancement mechanism to allow a state without a glass eel fishery to perhaps begin one. But I think rather than where I find it is embedded in option 6 that, is a yellow eel to glass eel transfer, and that would only apply if certain things happen. I'd like to elevate that up to its own level, to give it a little prominence and some thought, and I crafted it somewhat in the form of a motion, but to develop an alternative method for state to develop a controlled glass eel fishery based on habitat improvements that increase upstream and downstream eel passage in their state. So the idea would be that if you were able to improve glass eel passage to the tune of 10 million eels, the board would consider a fishery of some small fraction of that as a mechanism for a state to get into a glass eel fishery.
Any objection to including the concept by David? It's similar, I think, to where Mitch and Lewis are going, some other folks. So just weaving all those together and having different approaches to justifying or supporting glass eel harvest levels in the states. Any objection to that? Seeing none. Rob O'Reilly?
Yes, I was going to say, from Doug's comments, sort of a promotional management trigger when there can be relaxation. I think that's something that probably should be talked about a little bit more later. The other idea is I was thinking that we're really not bound by national standards. We started to dabble a little bit into some of the measures that federal government uses, but there's also a rebuilding horizon. So as Doug was talking, I was thinking, will the public have information as to some semblance of a rebuilding time frame? So the measures that have already been adopted and more that will be adopted, will there be information to give some characterization of when possibly, or some timeline when rebuilding could occur?
Brad, do you have any comment on rebuilding projections or timelines?
Well, the DBSRA model was used to explore that concept, but again, it wasn't approved by the peer review panel, and there's not a lot of support right now for using that, but it could be something done in the future.
Oops, sorry. That's it. That exhausts my list. If folks think of things they really need in here over lunch, I'll make one more offer, but I think we need to do that, dispense of that very quickly when we get back, and then jump into the ESA update and the proposal, aquaculture proposal from North Carolina. So